KTM is in trouble, as you may have heard. The subsidiary of Pure Mobility AG has filed to enter self-administration because it is insolvent. And as part of that entry, it has been reported by Austrian credit union AKV that the liabilities on KTM's side have been estimated at nearly 3 billion euros, a truly, truly staggering amount of money. Now, this is a very serious, real-life story. Obviously, we're going to look at it from a MotoGP, from a less serious perspective. But before we do that, Simon, what is your understanding as to how this happened? And was there any feeling in the MotoGP paddock through the year that KTM was in this deep a hole?
I mean, we've known for a while that there was problems within the KTM empire, within the wider Pure Mobility group that KTM sits inside of, largely because of a really aggressive expansion strategy kind of during and shortly after the COVID pandemic, where we saw them moving into cycling in a big way, starting a substantial line of e-bikes, as well as snapping up other brands in motorcycling like MV Agusta, like Gas, to complement both KTM and Husqvarna, which were already inside that bubble. It seems like that gamble has failed. Like they went in a direction that they thought the market was moving in, and it hasn't worked. And the result of that has been a huge amount of stock sitting in warehouses, €1 billion worth of motorbikes, we've heard, sitting in KTM's various storage facilities unsold. On top of that, there's the extra costs, there's the money they've had to borrow for this expansion, none of which has worked out for them. So we're now in this position where they owe €3 billion, which is substantially more than we thought. But it's not come as a huge surprise. We knew that there was going to be some of these liability issues. We already knew through the season that, for example, Gas would disappear again out of Grand Prix racing, having come in a pretty big way with KTM's satellite MotoGP team Tech 3. We knew that the smaller brands in Moto2 and Moto3, like Husqvarna, like Gas, were going to step back. So this didn't come with no warning whatsoever, but I think no one expected the €3 billion number that has emerged in the last few days, and no one really understands what's going to happen next as they try and manage the problem that they found themselves in.
You think MotoGP, I mean, I think a lot of us think Honda, Yamaha, Ducati now, right? But when you actually look at the MotoGP paddock, KTM's a pretty big player, isn't it? I mean, I think maybe people from the outside might even underestimate just the amount of impact KTM as a brand in its relatively short time as a MotoGP manufacturer, but it's obviously had involvement before. The amount of impact and the amount of teams that are being supported, the amount of involvement, right?
Well, I mean, when you look at Moto3, it's almost entirely KTM because they're the dominant bike and they're one of only two manufacturers supplying bikes to that championship. Then you look at Moto2. They're involved in all the front-running teams, be it Aki Ayo's Red Bull Rio squad, the Aspar CF Moto team, which is also linked to them, and TAC GP's Husqvarna project, are all linked to the KTM project. And then beyond that as well, the single most important feeder series into Grand Prix racing is arguably the Red Bull Rookies Cup, which is a KTM project in collaboration with their Austrian partners at Red Bull. So even apart from the MotoGP project, they control so much of the talent development program, the path to MotoGP. Essentially, without them and Honda, there wouldn't be a road to MotoGP. There wouldn't be this roadmap for creating talent that we have right now. They are beyond crucial to what MotoGP has become these days.
I believe that every single MotoGP world champion since Jorge Lorenzo in 2015 has ridden a KTM in some Grand Prix class at some point. Simon, the messaging from KTM is pretty consistent right now. They will race in 2025. The bikes are built, the bikes are ready. Some suggestions that the plans go unimpeded. There has been a report that development has been frozen, and that report has been challenged elsewhere in the Red Bull-owned Speed Week. It has been suggested that KTM will continue developing as it was supposed to. There is also talk of how this impacts the incoming 2027 regulations. We'll get to that shortly. But right now, with a $3 billion debt hanging over the company, with cuts that will be made to the workforce, with job losses that are coming, KTM says it is ready to race. Can it race? Does it look good to race?
I mean, the KTM narrative has been all the way through this that racing is inherently a part of KTM. The slogan for KTM, not KTM Racing, for KTM is ready to race. It is so inherent in their DNA, this desire to go racing, that there's a strong argument to be made that you lose so much marketing if you suddenly stop all your racing programs. They have to go racing if they want to sell the bikes that they have to sell right now. It's the same as advertising. So I think there's still that passion to go racing. I think there's a convincing argument for it that they'll be able to make to the people they've brought in as essentially voluntary administrators to the company to stave off bankruptcy. There's a case, yes, to reduce the impact of the racing program financially, but not to get rid of it. And the MotoGP project right now is probably the one that's easiest to sell because it's the highest profile. The bikes are there, the riders are signed. You know, they're not spending more money. They're not investing to start a MotoGP project. If we were looking at this situation in 2015, whenever they were talking about coming into the championship, it would be a whole different story. But it's not. That's not where their program is right now. So I think for the next 2 years, at least under the current regulations, things are going to be fairly consistent. Things are going to roughly stay where they are. We're not going to see massive shifts. We're not going to see a Suzuki-esque sudden departure from the championship in the medium term. Going into the new regulations in 2027 and having to build a new bike, that might be a different conversation. But for right now, I think we can be absolutely certain that there's going to be a KTM project on the grid next season and the season after as well, and that we're not going to see them significantly hampered in terms of development or recruitment or anything like that, because all the pieces are essentially already in place for it.
Yeah, obviously the contract for 2027 isn't signed yet. KTM Motorsport boss Pit Beirer said that, until the regulations are fully worked out, they can't really sign up. And now they can't really sign up anyway because of the situation KTM's in. You could not possibly sign off on something like that. KTM's in a weird situation because it can scale down, but it can't really scale down competitively. It is not in a Ducati position of luxury, right? The bike is not a race-winning bike right now. It has 4 riders who will all expect to win. One of them will expect to win a whole lot. Obviously, new boy Pedro Acosta. It has all those 4 riders under contract for the next 2 years, and assuming it can pay them and it can afford to be seen paying them, there is still, the long-term question of whether, even with an engine freeze that's coming in right now, whether this will hit it enough to where it can't develop, it can't make the development strides it needs to be meaningful and to hang on to its major assets. Because KTM probably only wins a title. We don't know if it hangs on to Pedro Acosta. How does KTM hang on to Pedro Acosta? Develop the bike? How does it develop a bike? Have the money to do it? Currently, questions about that.
Essentially, yeah. They need to find a way to walk the tightrope between keeping development moving in the right direction and keeping the financial people, keeping the accountants at KTM happy. It's doable. A substantial amount of the money that goes into the racing program does come from Red Bull. And although the Red Bull have said that they're not prepared right now to step in and save KTM, and similarly, KTM have said they're not ready to go to the Red Bull begging for more money after how loyal they've been to them over the years, that doesn't mean that there isn't still some room to pick up some slack. So from a development point of view, I don't see a massive amount of change coming. I mean, like you already said, Val, the engines are frozen. That's a huge thing. The aerodynamics are the things that are most likely to change. We already know that their aerodynamics program is run by Red Bull Racing, the F1 team. So that's an easy thing for Red Bull to just pick up the cost of without, making too much of a difference on it. I think, I'm fairly comfortable that the next 2 seasons is going to be okay. And then going into 27, we know that the bikes for 27 have been designed to be as cost efficient as possible in terms of the transfer over from the current generation of MotoGP technology. This is not going from 990s to 800s. This is going from a 1000cc engine to a slightly smaller 850 engine that's in the same package. So the transition should be relatively seamless. And, as you've said, the regulations aren't 100% fixed yet, but you would imagine that one of the things that KTM are going to be lobbying within the group to do right now is to try and make the regulations basically as cost effective as possible.
Yeah, and are you a little worried though? Because, even if they can afford to do it and they do it, if there's any delays down the line, you do not want to arrive into a long-term new regulation cycle with any sort of offset, with any sort of setback, especially when you're going up against, let's say, a brand like Ducati, which has its current bike super sorted, can barely do any more work on it, so can full focus on 2027. KTM's already arrived into this regulation cycle half a step behind through, obvious time reasons. It would really rather avoid having that happen again, but it might not have a choice.
I mean, from what we understand, the engine freeze that's currently in place is something that was pushed through by KTM, even prior to realizing how bad things were financially. So they've already been thinking about that on one hand, and I think that if they can get that right, if they can get the engine sorted, the rest kind of can take care of itself over time. So you would imagine with that freeze in place, there's probably already an 850 engine running on the dyno. They've got time to work at it. It doesn't have to be a rush job. It doesn't have to have a huge amount of resources pumped into it. I think that it's probably as straightforward as it can be. And I think it's been designed that way purposely to try and close down the advantage that Ducati does have. And that's going to work to their favour in the next few months and years.